This video contains major spoilers for Ori and the Blind Forest and Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Will of the Wisps. Will of the Wisps. This video contains spoilers for Ori 1 and 2. I first played Ori and the Blind Forest around 6 years ago. I loved every moment of it and thought it was one of the best games I'd ever played. So when the sequel got announced, I of course never bought it and always said I'd get around to it. Well, I finally got around to it, and I can confidently say that Ori and the Will of the Wisps surpasses its predecessor in every way. I'm Ouroboros. Let's talk. Will of the Wisps takes place a little while after Ori 1. Ori is a forest spirit who has managed to cobble together a sort of a makeshift family. Naru, Ori's adoptive mother, Ku, Ori's friend and hatchling of the original game's antagonist, and Gumo, who is, well, Gumo. One of Ku's wings kinda has the Nemo treatment and she struggles to fly. After some trial and error, Ori and Ku take flight only to be caught up in a storm and separated. Ori wakes up and begins the search for Ku. There's so much that gets conveyed in this opening segment without the use of any dialogue. I was impressed by how well Ori 1's story managed to hold my interest, but 2 is really incredible. You do still get the narration, but realistically, you don't really need it. I said this in my Blind Forest review, but it feels very storybook. Like, the gameplay is all of the illustrations and the narration is like your parents reading to you. You'd be able to figure out the story without one or the other, but they work hand in hand with each other. Ori and Ku's reunion is really sweet. I was happy to play as Ku in a few segments, but was disappointed that those chunks were relatively limited. I remember seeing that in a lot of the trailers for the game and figured it would play a bigger role in the gameplay. However, one thing that hasn't really changed is the fear you feel when encountering this game's antagonist, Shriek. Similar to Kuro, she dominates every single scene she's in and is an imposing figure all the time. At first, I thought that she was some kind of reanimated Kuro because of all the monstrous deformities, but nope, they are completely different characters. One of the most surprising parts of Ori 2's story is its liberal use of death. Again, this is a very cutesy storybook game, but a lot of the main characters die. I was not expecting Ku to die as soon as we got her back. It felt almost immediate. Of course, the game says that you can revive her, which I kinda figured would happen. It's a good way to get you to progress through to the end, but still, she's just so small and fragile. And then Quillock dies, and all of the Moki are super sad to see him go. This one surprised me even more because Quillock was supposed to be that mentor, wise figure. He's so much bigger than you and basically every other character. He takes care of the Moki, and has been a big source of information throughout a lot of the game. I almost liken it to seeing the Deku Tree die in Ocarina of Time, and like the Kokiri in that game, a lot of characters have new dialogue once he dies. In fact, a lot of the characters, especially those in the Wellspring Glades, have dynamic dialogue that will change based on the main story and side quest progression. That's one of my favorite changes in Will of the Wisps. There's so many more characters, there are fun and engaging side quests, and the world just feels more alive than in the Blind Forest. We do get some nice backstory for Shriek in the final dungeon. It's similar to what they did for Kuro in the original. That takes us to the ending. Oh boy, this ending. Where do I even start? The ghosts that appear at the end, Shriek going back to be with her family, Ori becoming the new spirit tree, the faces etched into the tree. It's perfect. Absolutely perfect. I get emotional with games. Definitely more than most people, but I don't cry very often when I play games. However, I was very teary-eyed watching all of this play out. This is when the themes of the series are at their peak. Life, death, and rebirth are all at the core of Ori. There are a few key differences though. Shriek does not have a redemption. There's no heroic sacrifice at the 11th hour. She goes back to her home and dies a villain. And there's no triumphant return for Ori. but a bittersweet death. And of course, after all of the emotional goodbyes, we see an illuminated leaf fly off the tree, narrated by the same voice that once guided us in the previous game. Thus, the cycle begins anew. It's so poetically touching, so poignantly emotional. It's one of the greatest endings in gaming, easily. I still think the top spot goes to Nier Automata, but my god, Ori 2 comes damn close. I'm thoroughly impressed with Moon Studios, truly. They managed to follow up their debut hit with something even more incredible. The story is consistent with the themes of the original, yet manages to resonate with me even more. The story is a step up in every aspect, and the gameplay is leagues above its predecessor. And it starts right away. The opening transitions right into gameplay. No loading screen, no cut, just straight into it. I sat there for a few seconds wondering when it was going to keep going, only to realize that I was now in control. And this tutorial is damn good. I've mentioned how much I love that this game can communicate so much with so little, but that even applies to this section. You get a feel for how Ori controls, and once again, the controls feel incredible. It gives you a nice, safe environment to experiment around with things. And we're actually given Kuro's Feather from the previous game, so you already have a new upgrade to play with, in addition to a brief section with Ku. This was the main reason why I wish we could have gotten more time to play as Little Bird. I felt like this foreshadowed more to come, but again, it is what it is. However, one of my favorite parts about this series is how quickly you get upgrades. This is unbelievably vital in a Metroidvania. You need to feel that consistent sense of progression. It needs to feel like you're always getting stronger. And Ori does this beautifully. It's like as soon as you feel you've mastered the previous ability, it's on to the next. I know I'm gonna piss some people off when I say this, but that's one of the reasons why I'm not the biggest fan of Hollow Knight. Wait. Before you crucify me in the comments, just let me explain. There's a lot of things Hollow Knight does incredibly well. I'm not saying it's a bad game, but because it's such a long game, the upgrades get spread way too thin. To me, it always felt like I had to walk a mile to get a grain of rice, then walk a mile to get another. Whereas with Ori, you take 10 steps and get a brownie, and then you turn the corner and there's a cookie waiting for you. It's all in quick succession, and all of Ori's abilities synergize really well together and generally feel like they have a bigger impact on the moment-to-moment gameplay than that of Hollow Knight. But enough of that little side tangent. The biggest and most impactful change that Moon Studios made was that to combat. Well, I say that combat has changed, but a better way to describe it is that combat has been added. See, we really just used to mash attack, and our little Orby dude would just shoot at enemies, and that was really it. There was no depth. It took me until the end of the Ginzo tree to realize that Ori and the Blind Forest was a platformer with a few combat elements. Ori 2 has fully realized combat. There are different weapons, abilities, and now a lot of the movement upgrades you get become viable combat options. They inherently work well with each other, and because of the newfound depth that this game brings, we can have actual boss fights. These are some of the most fun fights I've had in gaming. I remember getting to the Mora fight and being blown away by it. They really make the most out of both the combat and the movement. They fluidly merge the two into some really memorable experiences. That's one of the things I praised about Ori 1. Everything just felt so fluid. You're basically using every button on your controller, and yeah, sometimes you can mix up what button does what, but that feeling of using every tool in your arsenal is unrivaled. Like, take the bow you get early on. We've seen this kind of bullet time bow shot used before, like in Zelda. It's nothing new, but the physics of Ori just feel so good. So you're constantly repositioning with bashes and wall jumps and double jumps, throwing in melee and range hits, all while trying to not get hit. It's such an incredible combination. Ori has incredible lateral mobility. You can zip from one end of the screen to the other very quickly, but Moon Studios limits your vertical speed. That is, until you get the bash. I dedicated a good chunk of my Ori 1 review to praising this upgrade, basically calling it potentially the most impactful single ability in any game ever. I'd recommend you go check it out, but that video is old and Not so good. I might make a dedicated video on it, but TLDR, it recontextualizes literally everything in the game. You can now even bash off of the light burst that you can throw. Yeah, I know this was in Definitive Edition of Ori 1, but it was really underutilized. And at the very, very end of the game, you get what is essentially a portable bash with the launch ability. I was screaming when I first used this. It gave me my favorite ability whenever I wanted, and its utilization in the final Shriek fight is astounding. Hell, the entirety of the Shriek fight is superb. You slowly lose the ground beneath your feet until you're left with literally nothing. You can only bash and launch yourself. And the mask break becomes the weak spot for the fight. It's hectic, it's frantic, it's adrenaline pumping, it's perfect. God, and the music is fantastic. I really can't overstate just how incredible the last 30 minutes of this game are. I know I can be dramatic at times. I know sometimes it can sound like I'm exaggerating when I talk about games I really love, but the final bit of this game is literally as good as it gets anywhere. I'm so happy that they didn't replace the escape sequences with the boss fights, because the Ginzo Tree escape was by far the best moment in the original, and you still have those moments here. The escapes really test your platforming prowess, and the best part is that they are frequently incorporated into the boss fights. Take the Mora one, for example. You get an awesome escape sequence during the fight, and these flow perfectly into the next phase of the fight. You get a new arena, so it's not just a chase for the sake of having a chase. Again, this is just another thing that Ori fluidly weaves together: combat and platforming. They even managed to keep in a few of the stealth sections from the first game. These aren't the usual stealth missions in games that are either optional or the ones that we've kind of grown to hate. No, they're almost like mini escape sequences where you're trying to get from cover to cover as quickly as you can. It's almost like small little microdoses of those escapes. And there's a natural catharsis whenever you complete either of these sections. It's the same feeling when you complete a boss fight in, well, any game. I know I'm really terrible at platformers and 2D games, but Ori is generally pretty tough. That's part of what makes the stealth sections, escapes, and bosses so impactful. If there's no challenge, then you wouldn't feel that release of dopamine. I'm mixed on whether games need to be challenging or not. I think it just kind of depends on the game and what the developers are going for, but I think both Ori games sit perfectly along the difficulty spectrum. It's challenging, but it's not punishing, which is perfect for what they're going for. They did change it up so that there is an autosave. There aren't checkpoints like in the first game. I'm fine with this change. I don't think it makes too much of a difference, but that mostly comes down to the changes they made to the way energy is used as a resource. It now plays a much greater role more consistently through combat, so I feel that it would have been too punishing to also make it affect your save states. I realized this when I first started up the game. I initially wanted to dip my toes in and play for like 20-30 minutes, and I ended up playing for an hour. That's how much this game sucked me in. Another really awesome mechanic is in Moldwood Depths. It almost makes light a resource in the darkest areas. You'll die if you're in the dark for too long, so you have to quickly make your way from light to light or enemy to enemy. Your controller will even vibrate the closer you get to death. It makes for good practice in the eventual stealth and escape sections, as well as the Mora fight. Of course, you're eventually rewarded with the Flash, which essentially allows you free access to the area, and that's a good thing. You're rewarded for completing the challenges with something that will make exploration easier. It's perfect for a Metroidvania. It almost reminds me of the light suit from Metroid Prime 2. I really enjoyed the dungeons in this game. They were a lot of fun in the first game, and they're just as fun here. I do think they feel less level-y, if that makes sense. There were times when I didn't even realize I was in one because they just flowed so naturally into and out of the overworld. And that carries over into all of the areas as well. Not to say that the original felt segmented, but Ori 2 is more fluid. When I was playing it for this review, I was thinking that the dungeons could be done in any order. Once I finished, I went online and found that, yeah, you're pretty much completely free to tackle the challenges in whatever order you please. It's a nice touch and gives the game a ton of replayability. Honestly, just typing out the script makes me want to boot up a new save and try it out. I initially felt like I had completed a good chunk of the game when I reached the credits. The game brought me back to the main menu, and I only had 46%. Now, obviously, there are plenty of collectibles that don't make any impact, but still, I wanted to jump back in and do the obligatory Metroidvania post-game scavenger hunt for a bunch of hidden walls and upgrades. This has always been one of my favorite parts of this genre. You're unbelievably overpowered for most of the areas, and you can just bash your way through absolutely everything in your way. It's a great power fantasy in a game that doesn't have many moments like that. However, my favorite part of revisiting the world was finding all the spirit trials that I missed. These are fantastic. They're so much fun and can really make repeat visits, or even your first trip into an area, so memorable. And they'll take you a bunch of tries to complete. It's kind of a test to memorize the route and then optimize it. You also have a similar mechanic, but with combat. However, I found the platforming challenges way more engaging because you're racing against the clock. There was even an entire area that I missed before re-trekking through the world. The Midnight Burrows really shocked me with how much was left completely optional. It also feels like, because of the non-linearity, that your current loadout can make certain sections much easier. For example, I don't know if you need the light burst for the western area, but it feels like it makes a big difference. It can also make the incredibly fun environmental puzzles, like the one with the bubbles, more digestible. Regardless, my journey back through the world was almost as memorable as my first journey through it. And that is really helped by the world. Both games in this series are just so pretty. Everything from the characters to the environments to the particle effects to the music, all of it is superb. I especially like that the Horn Beetle boss fight is an arrangement of the area theme. Of the camera is fantastic. It'll shift to show you important things in an area, and the objects that appear in the foreground are awesome. It really gives it kind of a diorama feel. It's just a cute game. Even Ori taking damage has a cute little sound effect. I feel bad for saying that, but it's the truth. And the game is totally fine with just having you sit there and enjoy the aesthetics. It's perfectly content to just pause and admire the scenery. This is something that I wish more games would focus on. We've got the tech to make vibrant and colorful worlds. Not everything needs to be hyper-realistic. Even on the Switch, this game looks beautiful. However, the game does stutter a teensy tiny bit at times. The load times can be rough as well, but I'd imagine that's mostly due to the game running on Switch. And this is just a personal qualm, but it also feels like the camera can lag behind a little bit, especially once you get the swim dash. I don't think it's a performance issue, more of a coding issue, I think. I don't know, it's a small minor nitpick in a game full of amazing things. I honestly don't understand why it took me so damn long to play this game. I loved the first, and it's only like, what, 15, 20 bucks? I always do stupid things like this. I love Monster Hunter World, and it took me forever to pick up Iceborne. I always wanted to try out a Persona game, and then it took me like a year to finally pick up P5 when it came to Switch. I'm either incredibly patient or just apathetic? Let's hope for the first one. Anyway, I absolutely adored this game. Honestly, more than I really should have. I think it's funny because I can see how much I've grown since I reviewed the first game, and I've seen how much Moon Studios has grown since releasing their first game. Ori 2 feels like a natural evolution to its predecessor. I can't help but commend the developers for making such immense strides forward in the gameplay and storytelling. I said this earlier in the video, and I'll say it again. I don't often cry when I play games, but I struggled to hold back tears at the end of this game. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is stunningly brilliant and the perfect sequel. Thanks for watching.